1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in, OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We're back in the DFS lab. As always, this is presented by 1 week season. The purpose of this show, build a lineup on DraftKings. Use that as a vehicle to talk through the upcoming slate. It's November 12th, Tuesday, so very early look. Going to be at week 11. As always, I'm your host, Cheeseman, and I am joined now by the one and only Hilow. Hilow, I don't know how week 10 was for you. It was pretty rough for me. Basically, I entered 20 lineups and I cashed 2, and they were not high cashes. They were minimum cash. So I was basically down 80+%. Yeah, man, how was week 10 for you?
Similar story, to be honest. I entered 5 rosters and I took shots at the like mega milli $3,333 buy-in satellites. Trying to win my way into that bad boy. I think it's week 17 actually. Didn't cash a single roster. So that was fun. And it was a really weird week. I mean, like 4 skill position players scored more than like 25 points, which this doesn't happen very frequently. We knew going into the week that like we weren't gonna need 210 points to ship. I did not foresee needing like 170, 175. Really, really weird week. But that kind of changes this, like the meta of DFS has shifted significantly this year. We noticed it early on in the season. There were 2 big things that happened like early in the season. One, the scoring has been down in the league, so that shifts like our mentality about attacking game environments. The knee-jerk human reaction to like scoring being down is like, okay, well now I have less interest in game stacks. And the theoretical truth behind that is like, it's actually the opposite. Like if scoring is down, we should have more interest in game environment bets, because if one game environment goes absolutely bonkers, it's that much less likelier that anything else comes close to it. So we want to be able to position ourselves in a place to capture all that bulk upside and get 4 or 5 things right on a roster all at once. And it now is that much more unlikely that something else comes close to it. So we noticed that at 1 week season very early in the season. And we also have this shift that happened very early in this season where it was like passing touchdowns were down. So that brought back into like our crosshairs when we're constructing rosters of adding a running back in the flex. So those are the 2 big like macro aspects that we noticed at OWS very, very early in the season. And we've been hammering those edges. Now the field has caught up to the fact that, running back is viable again in the flex. We're seeing all like increased numbers of running backs put up 18 plus, 22 plus running back opportunities on a weekly basis. So now we know that like running backs are viable in the flex again. The problem now is DraftKings and FanDuel have both caught up to this and kind of taken it a step further when it comes to player pricing. So player pricing, as everyone has noticed, has been extremely tight on both primary sites the entirety of the season. Excuse me, sorry.
No worries.
And because of that kind of shifts our processes in identifying and attacking value. So now we have like 4 different macro aspects that are different this year in DFS as compared to years past. And it kind of came to a spearhead last week. And that's people were saying, oh my God, like scoring is so low. Like, yeah, we kind of known this for a while. It just kind of apexed last week. And it came to this spearhead where like everything came together. We had tight pricing. We had passing production was down. We had like a slate with very, very low game totals. We had like all these things that came together. No clear projectable value. That made it so that like 175 points was shipping major GPPs. That's not going to happen every week, but it kind of fits within the macro like changes in the DFS landscape of this season. So like, yeah, I wasn't that surprised. Like it was a shitty week. Like 4 skill position players put up 25 points or more. And one of them was Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So like it was a really weird week. But the big the big takeaway, I think, that the field has not the field has caught up to the running back and the flex. The field has caught up to the game stacking stuff. We saw it like a lull in it to start the season, and now we're seeing it pick back up with like primaries and game stacking being back up. Now, I think, and this is all speculation, but that's like what game theory is. We're taking what we know, we're taking our observations of the field, and we're building this like game plan to attack that. And a big part of that is those observations of the field. So I think that one of the biggest edges moving forward for the rest of the season, and typically like when we hit the midpoint of the season, we already see pricing get tighter. We already see, because like the pricing algorithms know they have a better sample size from which to draw to make pricing a lot tighter. So now we already have tight pricing, and we're entering this point of the season where we expect pricing to be really, really tight. So I think moving forward, the biggest spot where we can look to generate value, there's really two things that we want to be keeping in mind. The first is players that are simply and fundamentally, we'll say, underpriced relative to their role. So if we pull up like an example from this coming week, we can say that Christian McCaffrey is probably still fundamentally underpriced relative to his role. He immediately returned to a workhorse running back role last week, saw 88% of the offensive snaps, saw all but 6 running back snaps, and he saw all but 2 running back opportunities for the 49ers. So now you have a team with the highest Vegas applied team total on the slate, playing at home, playing a divisional opponent that they've really had their number, and he's priced at 8,300. So how can a player that is like the highest priced running back on the slate be fundamentally underpriced? Well, I mean, look at last season when he was in this same role, he was 9,700 at the end of the year. So
yeah,
I would say he's arguably fundamentally underpriced. So that's one way. Another example of the coming slate is probably Puka Nacua. This is a player that has 0 game. Well, he has 1 game, and it was last week where he was fully healthy. When he left after week 1 with his knee, he returned in week, what is it? Week 8. He returned in week 8 and played like 58% of the offensive snaps, something like that, 57. That's off of memory, so fact check me there. I think it's around there.
Snap count, I don't know. I don't know about snap count. But he had like 9 targets or something.
Yeah, it was somewhere in there, 57, 58%. And then he got kicked out in week 9 for throwing a weak ass punch. And then last week in week 10, he was back to like his normal role. And what happened? He saw 14 targets. So I would argue that he is fundamentally underpriced at 7,300. Another example is 2 players right below him and Garrett Wilson. And we singled him out last week as a player that was fundamentally underpriced as well for his role. And then he just the entire Jets offense just failed.
Systemic failure. Yeah.
Yeah. So with his increased ADA, I mean, his ADA is up to like 12.3 after Devontae Adams has joined the team. He's now working higher upside routes. So his per target upside is greater. And in games that the Jets just don't fail, he's probably like fundamentally underpriced at 7,100. So that's one way that I think we need to be shifting our mindset on value moving forward is like value. We have to divorce the word value from being this like, oh, where's the player price below 5K that projects
exactly.
Well. The second thing that I think we are going to transition our value hunting tendencies moving forward is the value team stack. And this is something that like at OWS, we've been attacking fairly heavily this year. Take you back a 4 weeks ago, whatever it was, when Jameis Winston came into town. Last week, for me, that value stack was like Drake May doubles. It was Drake May plus Ramondre Stevenson, because we saw Ramondre average over 20 fantasy points per game in games that the Patriots did not get blown out in. Didn't work out. I've doubled Drake May with Ramondre Stevenson and Hunter Henry, and then it was like the other tight end, I forgot his name, in New England, was like seeing all the work downfield. But anyway,
I can't remember either.
This idea of value team stacks. And why is that? Is because like passing touchdowns are down so much that there are fewer quarterbacks on a slate that can put up a score that you like had to have or you were not winning anything. Um, there are very few quarterbacks that still like have that within their weekly range of outcomes. Some of them are on this slate, so it gets a little bit dicier to talk about these value stacks, because you're not playing a value stack, which is like a cheaper quarterback with cheaper pass catching options. So like one or two cheap pass catching options. And the thesis there is, I'm not saying that this team or these guys are going to put the slate out of reach. You're saying that the players that can put the slate out of reach at quarterback fail to do so. And now a 24 point performance from your 5,500 quarterback. Plus, if he hits that, he's probably bringing somebody along for a solid like salary multiplier E type score. And I think like Cleveland is a perfect example of that. Like Cedric Tillman was 3,300 and then 4,300. And Jameis Winston was mid to low 5Ks, 5,200, 5,300. And we knew with a high degree of confidence that like the Browns were probably attempting 40 plus passes each game. So just saying, like, I'm not saying the Browns like score 40 points here. I'm saying like every team that could score 40 points doesn't. And then the Browns like score 3 touchdowns. And you're capturing those touchdowns with that stack. So like this, I think those are the two spots where moving forward throughout the rest of the season, we're going to be looking to capture our value. So the players that are fundamentally underpriced, and what you're doing by playing those players is you're effectively taking your 50K salary to like 55K. So that's a distinct advantage if you're increasing your salary in a salary cap game. And that's a way to conceptualize what like the players that are just priced too low are giving to you. And then this idea of like a value stack.
Yeah, man, absolutely. That's great stuff. And just it's good for me to hear too. It feels almost just like kind of a reset and be like, okay, like how do at the midway point, how do we look forward? And just try to find that value. So given the fact of looking forward, let's start looking here at week 11. Let me pull up DraftKings. I've already got a lineup pulled up. So you just tell me like, what contest we'll be building for theoretically, or do you want me to go back to the lobby?
No, that's fine.
So yeah, week 11, you already mentioned San Francisco, Seattle there at the top in terms of the over-under. And then Baltimore, Pittsburgh. Crazy enough, dude. First divisional game, I believe, for the Steelers against Baltimore. So that should be a competitive game. And then you got just a ton of games in the 44 range. So yeah, where do you want to start in terms of looking at this week and looking at this lineup?
Yeah, so we'll build we got the 555 milli again this week. So we kind of know that I've been attacking that heavily when it's there on the slate. It's been about every 3 weeks. So this is a week where I'll be attacking it. So we'll build for that. The 555 milli is $555 entry with just over 5,000 entries.
Yeah, and obviously $1 million to first, and that's just, you get such a smaller field when obviously you pay up for those higher entry fees. Whereas of course, as we all know, the normal milli is, nearly 200,000 entries.
Yeah.
Cool. Is that, just real quick, is that how much does that change your building style? Like it's a little bit more like a single entry, but you still have to be pretty aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah. So it fits my personal play style pretty well because I'm coming from the single entry 3 max streets. That kind of like my upbringing, what I chose to attack early in my DFS career. But my habits in those contests have shifted throughout the years to now I embrace a lot more variance than I think the field does in those contests.
Yeah.
Because it's about winning first, regardless of the size of the contest. The path to getting first place changes depending on the field sizes, depending on the buy-in level, depending on who your opponents are, because your opponents are going to change in those different dollar entry fee contests. But the goal is still to get first place. So I'm typically I'm okay embracing, and I've built my habit patterns around this, a little bit more variance. So I'll sacrifice like median projection, and I'll do it in a way that gives me a clear path to first place, which I think we've relayed this season. And it's evident in like the fact I've had like 5 sweats,
or 5,
5 sweats in 10 weeks is pretty aggressive. So I'm looking to get in the ship column. A better week than week 11, baby. Let's go.
Yeah, man. Okay, well, where do you want to start in this build?
So we'll start at some of those players that I mentioned were fundamentally underpriced, and see what we can build around it, see if we're comfortable, see what changes we have to make. We're just going to enter CMC as like kind of the player that I think is probably the most fundamentally underpriced. And then we'll throw in Puka as well and just see what we can build around that.
Awesome. So yeah, you got 49K remaining per player. And yeah, I mean, you talked about kind of those value stacks. I mean, I know that, Baltimore, obviously they've given up big games to typically the passing offenses, but you never know what Pittsburgh is going to do offensively with Arthur Smith there. Obviously you mentioned, I don't know if you're looking to attack the Browns again with Jameis Winston. I mean, do you want to look at a stack next though? Or like a value stack? Where do you want to go here?
Those are probably the two spots that are sticking out to me the most early in the week. The standard weather is changing. Everyone's getting sick thing.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I'm
trying to hold for you, the weather's changed, been changed for a while. For us in Arizona, it's like just changing.
Right, because you went from having like still in over 100 some in October, right? Or something like that?
Yeah. We were like, are we going to have to like, usually people are thinking about like, oh, we have to like hide the costumes because we're bundling up. It's like in Arizona, it could still be 100 degrees on Halloween. But
yeah,
anyway,
man.
So Pittsburgh and Cleveland are kind of the two spots that look the best as like this value stack type option early in the week. So we'll throw in Cedric Tillman. He's probably another player that is still fundamentally underpriced, or he is Foot Stomper. Like he is fundamentally underpriced relative to his role. He's 5,300. So like there's a very interesting psychological aspect that comes with Cedric Tillman because 2 games ago he was 3,300. And then he went to 4,300. Then they went on their bye, and now he's 5,300. So he has increased his salary by 1K each of his last 2 games. So there's this psychological aspect that comes into play here, saying like, oh, I probably missed the train on Cedric Tillman. I feel like a fish. I'm chasing points. All these things that come into play that are likely he's not going to go like overlooked, but he's going to have ownership that is probably lower than it should be still. Because if you look at click on his name, you pull up his recent work in this offense, he is the primary point of emphasis in this Browns offense post Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper was traded prior to week 7. Cedric Tillman games since then, 12 targets, 9 targets, 11 targets. So if you look at like comparing that volume, we're probably close to like, we'll compare that volume and that role, and that his role is as like a primary option. And this is not like in his ADOT, this is more in like his structure in the offense. So like they are building the offense around what Cedric Tillman can bring. So they're running like in route structures. We talked about this, I think last week or probably 2 weeks ago now. They're running a lot of high-lows routes, which are crossing routes, one from the left, one from the right, and they're layered by depth. He started being the low man in that high-low structure, and now he is kind of transitioned to the high man in that high-low structure, with Elijah Moore kind of being the low man. So he has high per target upside in this offense, in this role. The offense is kind of built to get him in space, which is beautiful, which is what we like to see. So like 9 targets, 11 targets, 12 targets as a primary piece of the offense, he probably is somewhat comparable to a guy like Puka Nacua on that volume and that role. So talk about like being fundamentally underpriced, even at 53K or 5,300 after seeing a 2K salary increase, he's probably the most fundamentally underpriced player on the slate. So I'm okay just saying like, hey, these 3 players, if you look at where they should be priced and where they are priced now, we're probably getting like 1K in relative savings in Puka. We're probably getting 1,500 relative savings in Christian McCaffrey. We're probably getting 2 to 2.5K in relative savings in Cedric Tillman. So that's already like 4K in salary that you are like quote unquote saving. So again, this idea of like this doesn't follow our standard like commonly accepted value formula, but we're now playing with a 54K salary.
Yeah, absolutely. Question, how do you compare Puka's role and Cooper Kupp? They're priced so similarly. Do you think that Puka is like moving towards almost like the more of the alpha receiver in this offense, or how is his and Cooper Kupp's role different?
He is the alpha in the offense, Puka Nacua. The motion man in this Rams offense changes per the package and per the plays. It's either Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, or a tight end typically.
Okay.
And what we see and what we saw early in the season from the Saints is kind of how they utilize tight end in motion. They don't utilize them like in motion to go into a route. They utilize him in motion to help with blocking. So they put the tight end in the slot, and it's like the opposing defense is like, okay, I can send 5 players and now I can get like a numerical advantage, or I can send 5 or 6 players from on the blitz and get a numerical advantage. And then you have the tight end in motion. The ball is snapped before he crosses the quarterback's like line of sight to the center. And typically you see this like out of shotgun. And as that tight end's in motion, now you see him just cross the formation and pick up the weak side blitz. And typically how you define like weak side, strong side is the side of the formation that the tight end is on. So if the opposing defense recognizes, okay, this is the weak side, we're going to send extra blitzers from this side.
Right.
Send the tight end formation. Now he goes and picks up that weak side blitz. And that's kind of how they're utilizing. We saw it in with the Saints over the first 2 games. They kind of gone away with that as they've dealt with injuries and stuff. And that's this like Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay-esque. It's very in keeping with his like pedigree as a coach.
Got it. Awesome. Cool, man. So you got these 3 in, and yeah, great explanation on that. Yeah, I mean, especially considering that he is kind of like the alpha in that offense now. 7,300 seems with how well that offense functions with when they have their big 3 and obviously Stafford. Yeah, I like how you're starting this though. Kind of these 3 value pieces, even though they're not like 4K or something like that. So
yeah.
So where do you want to go next?
I think another position or another player that is fundamentally underpriced relative to his role right now is De'Von Achane. He's 7,200. So now it becomes like, do we play probably in this discussion? Do we play Achane or do we play Puka Nacua? And I don't think one stands out more than the other, but he's just a name that we should probably mention as a player that's probably fundamentally underpriced, because just on pass game volume alone and pass game production alone, he equates to effectively like the wide receiver 10 in production through air. That's through the air alone. And that's in games where Tua Tagovailoa is on the field. So in games with Tua Tagovailoa, De'Von Achane is seeing pass game usage alone to equate him to a wide receiver 10 in production. And then you add on like the 10 to 12. I mean, look at between 10 and 15 carries in each of the last 4 games. You add on like the 10 to 12 carries you expect from him, and you're effectively getting like an overall package that equates to like the wide receiver 5 in production at running back for a price of 7,200. So he's fundamentally underpriced. Go to the wide receiver column and just look at like wide receiver pricing. So Jefferson 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He would be priced at the wide receiver 6 right now. And he's providing a production package that is in line with the wide receiver 5, but now you can play him at running back. So that's kind of the De'Von Achane. He's probably underpriced story.
I would say for sure.
So yeah, just keep an eye on him. So yeah, we got to get this lineup moving. Let's go to let's make a primary game stack with the Steelers and the Ravens. And we're going to we can't use Lamar because this lineup has already used a lot of salary. So we'll go to Russ. Russ Wilson. If you're playing Russ, you're saying, and like, how you're basically asking the question, if you're playing Russ, how does he get to 25 fantasy points? In that same discussion of like, go to the quarterback tab, how many quarterbacks on the slate can put up a score that you had to have? It's probably just Lamar Jackson.
Yep.
So
really.
If we're saying Lamar Jackson fails to do so, or even if he does, that probably increases the chances of Russ putting up a score that is at least keeps pace at 2,100 less. So if Lamar Jackson fails to put up a 40-point fantasy score, which is very much within his weekly range of outcomes, if he fails to do that, though, now it opens up the path for these value stacks to kind of gain a little bit more weight. And in order to play Russ, you have to pair him with George Pickens. You have to. He's such a massive piece of this offense. And if we're pairing him with George Pickens, now we have another 7K wide receiver, and that doesn't leave us a ton of salary for running back. So we probably have to change Puka to De'Von Achane. Mm-hmm.
All right.
So there's the initial, and we need some value still. And there's a player on the Steelers who is probably the one that is least likeliest to see his role change with the addition of Mike Evans. And Mike Evans came to the team before last week. He played only like 6 or 7 offensive snaps, scored the touchdown, but he was not on the field a ton. When Mike Evans' role grows in this offense, it's probably coming at the expense of Van Jefferson in that X-type wide receiver role for this offense. So when that happens, Calvin Austin, who is the slot man, the speedster, has a high ADOT out of the slot. He's also a return guy. Probably sees his role change the least. And if Calvin Austin goes for a couple of long catches, if he puts up like a 3 for 101 type game, like very similar to Marquez Valdes-Scantling last week, if he does that, now it becomes that much more likely that Russ is hitting like the 300-yard passing bonus and throwing for multiple touchdowns. All the things that we want when we're putting Russ in the lineup, like Calvin Austin can help him get to. So we'll add Calvin Austin. He's only 3,600, playing out of the slot. And if he's playing out of the slot, and if we're saying like Baltimore is putting up points on Pittsburgh, then we're probably going to see an increase to the 11 personnel rates. So all of it kind of matches if in this game environment bet that we're making. And in that game environment bet that we're making, we probably need a piece of the Ravens, because what is pushing Pittsburgh to be a little bit more pass forward leaning in its production by the Ravens. So we'll enter kind of a value option. And that is tight end Mark Andrews. So we don't know if Isaiah Likely is going to come back. He missed last game, but they had a long week and like they played last Thursday night. But either way, like Andrews, like click his name real quick. Starting to come on, right? Starting to come on a little strong. He has
the last 5 weeks, dude, just crushing that salary.
5 touchdowns in the last 5 games. Becoming a little bit more. We're never going to see like Mark Andrews put up 12 targets, right? Or it's very unlikely. You have to have a very, very specific game environment for him to put up like a 12, 13 target game. So what you're saying is Mark Andrews scores multiple touchdowns. And if Mark Andrews scores multiple touchdowns, it honestly is a little bit of a knock against Lamar Jackson, because we're saying that like those touchdowns are coming through the air and they're not coming through the ground, which is 4 points versus 6 points. So it's like it's a roundabout way of saying like, well, Lamar Jackson fails to put the slate out of reach. If Mark Andrews scores multiple touchdowns, it's a little bit less likely that Lamar Jackson does. But the standard way of playing Mark Andrews is to just pair him with Lamar Jackson and say like, if Mark Andrews scores multiple touchdowns, it becomes that much more likely that Lamar Jackson does put the slate out of reach because the offense is humming, and yeah, you get it. But
yeah,
we're going to attack this game environment from the Steelers side and say the reason that they have to pass more is through Mark Andrews.
Yeah, man. And that gives us 8,100 total left, 2 spots, defense being one of them. And so do you want to look at defense next and just kind of see what we'll have to work with?
Yeah, let's look at defense next, and let's go high end first, and we'll put in the Vikings.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. Okay, so.
And then what does that leave us? That's Marquez Valdes-Scantling, effectively. 4,400.
Hey, he can do it twice in a row.
Yeah, it's very interesting because MVS now in this offense, in the Saints offense, it basically entered the Rashid Shaheed role. Function, structure, that's what they've kind of brought him in to do. And it just happened based on happenstance that Buffalo trades for Amari Cooper. They release MVS. Rashid Shaheed goes down. It's like this perfect storm of stuff that had to happen for MVS to like find that role. But like he's probably in the best role for his archetype in the league, probably. Like he landed in the optimal spot. So we could go there. That's kind of the answer if we go Vikings. Now let's see if there's another defense.
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland does generate pressure, right? So Derek Carr, we all know how he is under pressure.
Yeah, they do.
Not that it still can't happen, though. I mean, because 3 targets, and MVS, you're right. The Rashid Shaheed role is valuable. But, okay, so, I mean, obviously you have the Bears down here at 2,400.
Throw in the Broncos.
Okay, yeah,
home.
2,900. Okay, now let's see.
Let's see what we got.
Okay. Keenan Allen, Christian Watson. He can get there.
Scroll down a little.
Addison.
Yeah, there's nothing here that really maybe Roma Dunze, but even then, like the Packers secondary has been really good.
It has.
Yeah, so there's nothing here that like makes me say I would accept the hit at defense. So we'll just go the Vikings and MVS.
Let's do it.
And just say like, hey, MVS catches another. Like if we could get Rashid Shaheed at 4,400, would we? Is effectively the question.
And I think the answer would be yes. Yeah, absolutely. At 4,400. Yeah. Man, too bad that he got hurt. Awesome. So for the podcast, those of you listening, what we ended up on is Russell Wilson at quarterback with Christian McCaffrey, De'Von Achane, and Cedric Tillman, who Hilow outlined as 3 of the most probably fundamentally underpriced plays on the slate. Puka Nacua was also one of them, just couldn't fit him. Calvin Austin at a receiver, George Pickens, the pair with Russ, then Mark Andrews, the bring back, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and the Vikings defense. Hilow, anything else you want to add before we ship this one?
Yeah, MVS, just thinking about MVS a little bit more, he does make a lot of sense on this roster because he gives us a nice little game mini with Cedric Tillman. So that's probably the answer there.
That's brilliant. I didn't even see that. So great call there. Awesome, dude. Well, great. This is great stuff. And I like just the whole discussion about the value. I think it was super valuable, to put it simply. But Hilow, thanks, man. Good luck for week 11. Good luck attacking the 555. I hope to ship it, dude.
Thanks, man. We'll see you guys.
All right, see ya.